The Galactic Assembly had a tradition that was older than most civilizations in the known universe. They called it the bonding selection. When a princess from a noble alien house reached the proper age, suitors from across the galaxy would come to present themselves. But before her true match was chosen, the selection committee would first assign her a practice guardian. This guardian would teach her the customs of diplomatic life and prepare her for her future. Princess Zirith Cholera of the Valorian sovereignty was the most desired royal in 3 entire sectors of space. Her skin was a beautiful silver-violet color that seemed to shimmer like starlight whenever she moved. She had 4 eyes that held ancient wisdom passed down through generations of her people. Her family controlled trade routes that were worth more than entire planetary systems combined. Every noble house wanted their son to be matched with her, but the selection committee hated her mother. The queen had pushed for progressive changes that threatened their power. They had waited years for a chance to strike back. Now they saw their opportunity for the perfect humiliation. They assigned Princess Zirith to a human. The announcement sent shockwaves. Through the assembly hall, humans were considered one of the lowest species in the galaxy. Most aliens thought they were barely intelligent enough to tie their own shoes. They were emotional creatures who cried at sad stories and laughed at silly jokes. They lived such short lives that many species considered them mayflies. Humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel about 200 years ago. In galactic terms, they were newborn babies. Humans worked as janitors on space stations. They hauled cargo between planets. They did the manual labor that no respectable species wanted to do. They were the galaxy's afterthought. A cosmic joke that no one took seriously. The human they chose was named Marcus Cole. He worked as a cultural liaison officer on orbital station Thresh 7. Was a polite title for someone who resolved petty arguments between different species and translated documents that no important person would ever read. He was nobody. He was nothing. He was perfect for their cruel joke. When the committee announced the pairing, laughter filled the assembly hall like thunder. Princess Zirith's rivals covered their mouths and smirked. Her enemies recorded everything on their devices to share across the galactic networks. The message was perfectly clear. The princess and her progressive mother were being put in their place. Far away on orbital station Thresh 7, Marcus Cole received the assignment notification while eating cheap noodles in his tiny quarters. The room was barely big enough for a bed and a small desk. He stared at the holographic seal of the Valorian sovereignty floating above his communication device. The seal was beautiful and ornate, clearly belonging to extremely important people. Marcus read the message 3 times. Then he checked to see if it was some kind of mistake. He ran the verification codes twice. He even contacted the station administrator to confirm the message was real. It was not an error. He had really been assigned as the practice guardian to one of the most important princesses in the galaxy. Marcus sat back in his chair and looked at his half-eaten noodles. He had no idea why this was happening. He had no idea what he was supposed to do. But he had learned long ago that life rarely made sense. All he could do was show up and do his best. 3 days later, Princess Zirith's royal transport arrived at orbital station Thresh 7. The docking bay was cleared of all regular workers. Station security lined the walls, nervous about hosting such important visitors. The air itself seemed to grow tense. The transport doors opened with a hiss of pressurized air. Princess Zirith stepped out, followed by 4 armed guards in gleaming armor. She stood tall and proud, her silver-violet skin catching the harsh station lights and making them look soft. Her 4 eyes scanned the docking bay with cold precision. She expected to find the human cowering before her. She expected him to apologize for his very existence. That was what lesser species always did when they met Valorian royalty. They trembled. They begged. They made themselves as small as possible. Marcus Cole walked toward her with a calm expression on his face. He was average height for a human, with brown hair that was slightly messy and kind eyes that showed no fear. He stopped at a respectful distance, and gave her a polite nod. "Welcome to Thresh 7, Your Highness," he said. His voice was steady and warm. "I hope your journey was comfortable. May I help carry any of your luggage?" The guard stiffened at this suggestion. For a human to touch royal belongings was scandalous. Zyreth's 4 eyes all focused on Marcus with sudden intensity. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He simply waited for her answer with patient politeness. "My guards will handle the luggage," Zyreth finally said. "Of course." Marcus nodded as if this was completely normal. "I've prepared quarters for you and your team. Before we head there, I wanted to ask about a few things. Do you prefer your rooms warm or cool? I know different species have different comfort ranges. Also, do you have any foods you cannot eat? I want to make sure the meal services know what to prepare for you." Zyreth stared at him. These were practical questions. Thoughtful questions. Questions that showed he had actually considered her comfort before she arrived. No groveling. No fear. No apologies for being human. Just simple, genuine kindness. One of her guards leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Your Highness, should we report his behavior? He shows no proper respect." Zyreth raised one hand slightly, signaling the guard to be silent. She continued to study the human before her. He stood there calmly, waiting for her answers so he could help her settle in. "Cool," she finally said. "I prefer my quarters cool, and I cannot eat anything with copper-based proteins. They are toxic to my species." Marcus nodded and made a note on a small device he pulled from his pocket. "I'll make sure everything is arranged. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your quarters. The station isn't fancy, but I've done what I could to make things comfortable." He turned and began walking, clearly expecting her to follow. The guards looked outraged at this casual behavior, but Zyreth found herself walking after him, her curiosity growing with every step. The selection committee had sent her here to be humiliated. They had given her the lowest possible guardian to show her how little power she truly had. They expected her to suffer through this assignment and return home broken, but as Zyreth watched Marcus Cole explain the station layout in his calm, helpful voice, she began to wonder if they had made a terrible miscalculation. This human was not what she expected. He was not what anyone expected. The joke, she realized, might end up being on someone else entirely. She did not know it yet, but her life was about to change forever. And it would all begin with this strange, fearless human who treated her not as a prize to be won or a symbol to be worshipped, but simply as a person who needed help settling into a new place for the first time in her royal life. Princess Zyreth Kalara was genuinely interested in learning more about someone else. The first week was designed to break them both. The selection committee had given detailed instructions to make the assignment as difficult as possible. They wanted the princess to suffer. They wanted the human to fail. They wanted to prove that their cruel joke was justified. The diplomatic simulations were designed for failure. No matter what choices were made, the outcomes were always terrible. The cultural assessments had rigged parameters that made success impossible. The quarters they were given had constant problems with heating, water, and power. Marcus noticed all of this within the first 2 days. He said nothing about it to anyone official. He did not complain. He did not point fingers. He simply started solving problems one by one. When their assigned quarters lost heating in the middle of the night cycle, Princess Zyreth expected Marcus to file a formal complaint. Instead, she found him the next morning sharing breakfast with 2 members of the Droxy maintenance crew. The Droxy were small, 4-armed creatures that most species considered too lowly to even speak with. They cleaned the station and fixed broken equipment. Nobody important ever noticed them. Marcus had noticed them on his first day aboard the station years ago. He had learned their names. He had asked about their families. He had helped them with small favors whenever he could. Now, when he needed help, they were happy to return the kindness. Within hours, not only was the heating fixed, but Marcus and Zyreth were moved to a better module entirely. The Droxy had found unused quarters that had been sitting empty for months. They were larger, warmer, and had a window that looked out at the stars. Zyreth watched all of this silently. She was beginning to understand something important about humans. The diplomatic simulations continued too. Present impossible scenarios. A border dispute between two warring factions. A trade negotiation where both sides demanded everything and offered nothing. A hostage situation where any action would lead to deaths. Most beings tried to find the winning move in these simulations. They looked for the clever trick that would give them victory. When they failed, they grew frustrated and angry. Marcus did not try to win. He tried to understand in the border dispute. He asked questions about why the two factions were really fighting. The simulation was not programmed to answer such questions. It crashed and had to be restarted. In the trade negotiation, he suggested that both sides work together to create something new that neither had considered. The simulation had no response for this. It crashed again. In the hostage situation, he asked to speak with the hostage takers about their demands. He treated them like people with reasons for their actions rather than obstacles to defeat. The simulation crashed a third time. The committee members watching these results were furious. The simulations were supposed to show human stupidity. Instead, they showed that the human was asking questions nobody had bothered to ask. On the 8th day, Xerath finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she arrived. "Do you know why they assigned you to me?" Marcus was sitting at his small desk, reviewing supply requests on a datapad. He did not look up when he answered. "To humiliate you?" he said simply. "You are being punished for something. My species is the punchline to their joke. That does not make you angry?" Now he looked at her. His single pair of eyes, so different from her four, held no hatred. There was no bitterness in his expression, just calm acceptance, and perhaps a small amount of warmth. "Your Highness, I have been the punchline my entire career. Every job I have taken, someone has told me that humans cannot do it. Every success I have achieved, someone has said it was luck or a mistake. I am good at my work despite what others think of me." He shrugged his shoulders. "It seems to me that you are good at your work despite whatever politics you are dealing with. We can be jokes together, or we can simply do the work and let them choke on our success." Xerath had grown up in royal courts filled with poison and poetry. Every word spoken in those halls was a weapon. Every kindness offered was actually a trap. She had learned to trust no one and suspect everyone. Marcus spoke plainly. He said exactly what he meant. He expected nothing from her in return. It was the most disarming thing she had ever encountered. Over the following weeks, Xerath began to study human behavior with the intensity of a scientist examining a new species. She watched how Marcus interacted with everyone on the station. She paid attention to the small details of his daily life. He remembered things that no one else bothered to remember. He knew the name of the cleaning worker's daughter. He knew that the food vendor from the lower levels had lost his brother last year and still grieved. He knew that the security officer on night shift was studying to become a doctor and needed encouragement. Humans, Xerath realized, were not simple creatures at all. They were connective. They built webs of relationship and loyalty that went beyond logic or calculation. Where Valorians always asked what advantage a friendship would bring, humans simply cared. Marcus Cole cared about everything. He cared about people he would never see again. He cared about problems that did not affect him. He cared about making small moments better for strangers who could never repay him. It was inefficient. It was illogical. It was completely impractical. And yet, when Marcus needed help, dozens of people across the station were willing to offer it. His network of genuine friendships was more powerful than any political alliance Xerath had ever seen. One evening, Xerath received a private communication from her mother, the Queen. The holographic image of her mother's face was tight with concern. "How are you enduring the insult?" her mother asked. "I am working to end this assignment early. The committee will pay for this humiliation." Xerath thought about Marcus sharing breakfast with the maintenance crew. She thought about him asking questions that broke simulations designed for failure. She thought about the quiet network of kindness he had built without even trying. "I am learning more than I expected," Xerath said. Her mother's four eyes widened with surprise. "Learning? From a human?" "From this human, yes." Xerath paused, searching for the right words. He is not what I expected. He is not what anyone expects. And I am beginning to think that is exactly why they fear his kind. After the communication ended, Xerath stood by the window of her quarters and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the selection committee was waiting for her to break. They were waiting for her to beg to come home. They were certain their cruel joke would destroy her. They had no idea what was really happening. They had no idea that their joke had given her the most valuable education of her life. They had assigned her to a human to teach her humility through humiliation. Instead, the human was teaching her something far more important. He was teaching her that kindness was not weakness. He was teaching her that caring was not foolishness. He was teaching her that the greatest power in the universe was not wealth or armies or political alliances. The greatest power was the ability to make others feel seen and valued, and humans. These short-lived emotional creatures that the galaxy dismissed as nothing understood that power better than anyone. Xerath smiled softly at her reflection in the window. She did not know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She was not going to let Marcus Cole remain a joke forever. 3 months passed on Orbital Station, Thresh 7. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Marcus and Xerath worked together on their assigned tasks. They shared meals and conversations. They learned about each other's worlds and ways of thinking. For Xerath, it was the happiest time of her life. She had never had a friend before. In the royal courts, everyone wanted something from her. Everyone was calculating how to use her for their own benefit. But Marcus wanted nothing. He simply enjoyed her company and offered his own in return. Then the summons arrived. The holographic seal of the selection committee appeared in her quarters without warning. The message was brief and formal. The practice period was complete. Princess Xerath was commanded to return to the Valorian homeworld immediately. Her true match had been selected. She would marry Lord Vrethus of the Coromon dynasty. Xerath felt her blood turn to ice when she read that name. Lord Vrethus was old and cruel. His wealth came from industries that exploited workers across a dozen planets. He had buried 3 wives already, and dark rumors followed each death like shadows. His family had been enemies of Xerath's house for generations. This was not a marriage. This was a trap. The committee had engineered everything perfectly. By assigning her to a human, they had kept her distracted while they arranged this nightmare. The marriage would cement an alliance between the Coromon dynasty and the committee's supporters. Xerath's family would be forced to accept or face open war. If she refused, millions would die in the conflict. If she accepted, she would be a prisoner in her own home, married to a monster. There was no way out. There was no good choice. Xerath stood frozen in her quarters, staring at the summons hologram. Time lost all meaning. She did not know how long she stood there before the door chimed and Marcus entered. He took one look at her face and knew something was terribly wrong. "What happened?" he asked quietly. And then, for reasons she could not fully explain, Xerath told him everything. She told him about the selection committee and their hatred of her mother. She told him about Lord Vrethus and his cruelty. She told him about the political trap that had been closing around her since before she was born. She told him about the impossible choice between her freedom and her people's blood. She spoke not as a princess to a servant. She spoke as something she had never had before. She spoke as a friend to a friend. Marcus listened without interruption. His face grew serious as she explained the depths of the conspiracy against her. When she finished, she expected him to offer sympathy, but admit there was nothing to be done. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful and thoughtful. "On Earth, we have an old story," he said. "A princess locked in a tower, waiting for someone to rescue her." A small smile crossed his face. "But the best versions of that story are the ones where she rescues herself. Or even better, where she finds someone worth escaping with." "You are suggesting I run away?" "That would mean abandoning my people. The committee would use it as an excuse for war. I am suggesting that you have more options than they want you to believe." Marcus looked directly into her 4 eyes with his 2. "You are one of the most capable people I have ever met. Whatever you choose to do, make sure it is your choice, not theirs. That night, after Marcus had left, Xyrith sat alone in the darkness. His words echoed in her mind. Your choice, not theirs. For her entire life, other people had made choices for her. Where she would live, what she would study, who she would meet. Now they wanted to choose who she would marry. They assumed she would accept because she had always accepted before. But what if she didn't? Xyrith activated her personal terminal and accessed the Valorian legal archives. She had never bothered to read these ancient documents before. Laws were for politicians and lawyers to worry about. Princesses simply did as they were told. She searched for hours. Her eyes grew tired, but she did not stop. Somewhere in these endless records, there had to be something. Some rule, some exception, some path that no one had considered. She found it buried deep in texts that were centuries old, the right of foundation. It was a forgotten provision from the early days of the Valorian sovereignty. In those times, arranged marriages often led to disaster. Alliances failed. Houses went to war. The founders had created an escape valve for desperate situations. Any royal could refuse an arranged match by invoking the right of foundation. Instead of a political marriage, it would choose a foundation bond. This was a partnership focused not on alliances or wealth, but on building a new household from nothing. The catch was severe. The foundation partner had to be someone of no political standing. Someone who brought no wealth, no armies, no strategic value of any kind. The royal who chose this path would give up their claim to family fortune. They would surrender their royal privileges. They would start their new life with nothing but what they could build together. The provision had been designed to be so unappealing that no one would ever use it. Who would give up everything for a life of poverty and hard work? Xyrith read the provision 17 times to make sure she understood it correctly. Then she began to laugh. It was not a small laugh. It was not a polite laugh. It was a laugh that came from deep inside her, shaking her whole body. Her guards outside the door heard it and exchanged worried glances. They had never heard such a sound from their princess before. The selection committee had given her Marcus Cole as an insult. They had assigned her the lowest possible guardian to show her how little she mattered. They thought they were teaching her humiliation. Instead, they'd given her the key to her freedom. A human cultural liaison officer on a forgotten space station. A man of no political standing. Someone who brought no wealth. No armies, no strategic value. Someone who had shown her more genuine kindness than anyone else in her entire life. The right of foundation required exactly such a person. Xyrith stopped laughing and wiped tears from all 4 of her eyes. Her mind was racing now, calculating every angle, considering every possibility. There would be consequences. There would be hardship. She would be giving up everything she had ever known, but she would be free. And she would not be alone. She activated her communication terminal and sent a single message to Marcus Cole. I need to speak with you tomorrow. I have found a way out, but I will need your help. Then she lay down on her bed and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. The selection committee thought they had trapped her. They thought their cruel joke had won. They were wrong. Princess Xyrith. Cholera was about to turn their joke into the beginning of something they could never have imagined. The Galactic Assembly Hall was the largest enclosed space in the known universe. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed inside. Its walls were lined with the flags and symbols of 1,000 different species. Seats rose in endless tiers, filled with nobles, ambassadors, and royal families from every corner of space. Today, every seat was taken. Word had spread that something unusual would happen at Princess Xyrith's bonding ceremony. No one wanted to miss the spectacle. Lord Vrethus stood at the ceremonial altar in the center of the hall. He wore robes of black and gold that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. His face was thin and sharp, with eyes that held no warmth. A cold smile rested on his lips. He looked at the gathered crowd like a predator, surveying his territory. The selection committee sat in their elevated seats of honor. They were old and powerful, draped in the finest silks, and surrounded by attendants who catered to their every need. Their expressions showed satisfaction. Everything had gone according to their plan. Princess Xyrath entered the hall through the main doors. She walked alone, without guards or attendants. Her silver-violet skin seemed to glow under the massive lights. She wore a simple white gown instead of the elaborate ceremonial dress that tradition demanded. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Where were her guards? Why was she dressed so simply? What was happening? Xyrath walked down the long center aisle. Every step was measured and purposeful. She did not look at Lord Vreth's. She did not look at the selection committee. She looked straight ahead with all four of her eyes fixed on something only she could see. When she reached the center of the hall, she stopped. The High Arbiter, an ancient being who had overseen these ceremonies for centuries, began to speak the traditional words. We are gathered to witness the bonding of Princess Xyrath Kalara of the Valorian sovereignty to Lord Vrithis of the Korriman dynasty. This union shall bring peace and prosperity to both houses for generations to come. Does anyone present know of any reason why this bonding should not proceed? Silence filled the hall. This question was a formality. No one ever spoke against a bonding that had been approved by the selection committee. The consequences would be too severe. I do, said Princess Xyrath. The silence shattered into chaos. Voices rose from every tier of seats. Lord Vrithis' cold smile vanished, replaced by confusion and then anger. The selection committee members leaned forward, their faces twisted with fury. The High Arbiter raised one hand, and the hall slowly fell quiet again. On what grounds does the princess object? The Arbiter asked. Xyrath's voice rang clear and strong across the enormous space. I invoke the right of foundation. Now the confusion was total. Most of the gathered beings had never heard of such a thing. The selection committee members looked at each other with uncertainty. Even Lord Vrethis seemed unsure how to respond. The High Arbiter's ancient eyes narrowed. The right of foundation is an outdated provision. It has not been invoked in over 400 years. It has not been removed from our laws, Xyrath replied calmly. Therefore, it remains valid. The right requires a foundation partner, the Arbiter said slowly. One of no political consequence, who agrees to build a household from the ground up. You would surrender your claim to Valorian wealth. You would give up your royal privileges. You would start your life with nothing. I'm aware of the requirements, Xyrath said. She turned to face the main doors of the hall. Marcus Cole of Earth, will you stand as my foundation partner? The great doors opened. Marcus walked in wearing his cleanest uniform, which still had a small coffee stain on the sleeve that he had not been able to remove. He looked nervous. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. 100 alien species stared at him with expressions, ranging from disbelief to disgust. He walked the length of the hall anyway. Every step was watched by thousands of eyes. Marcus was not tall or strong or impressive by any physical measure. He was just a human. Just a cultural liaison officer from a forgotten space station. Just the punchline to a cruel joke. But he kept walking. When he reached Xyrath's side, he looked at her with those warm human eyes that held no fear. You sure about this? He whispered. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, she whispered back. Lord Vrithis' face contorted with rage. He stepped forward, his robes swirling around him like dark wings. This is absurd, he shouted. A human? This creature is barely more intelligent than an animal. The committee would never allow such an insult to proceed. The committee has no authority over the right of foundation, Xyrath said calmly. It was created by the original founders of the sovereignty. It predates your entire dynasty by 2,000 years, Lord Vrethis. I suggest you have your legal advisors review the ancient texts. The High Arbiter called for the ancient records to be brought. A team of archivists rushed to gather the documents. For long minutes, the Arbiter studied the old laws, while the entire hall waited in tense silence. Finally, the Arbiter looked up. The princess speaks truth. The right of foundation remains valid under our laws. The selection is hereby nullified. The hall erupted. Lord Vrethis screamed his objections. The selection committee members shouted demands that were ignored. Supporters of Xyrith's family cheered, while their enemies cursed. Through it all, Xyrith took Marcus's hand. "We should go," she said quietly. They walked back up the long aisle together, leaving the chaos behind them. The guards at the doors stepped aside, unwilling to interfere with someone who had just invoked ancient law. No one tried to stop them. Outside the assembly hall, a small transport waited. Xyrith had arranged it in advance. They climbed aboard, and the doors sealed shut, blocking out the sounds of the furious crowd as the transport lifted away from the planet. Marcus finally allowed himself to breathe, so he said, looking at Xyrith with wonder in his eyes. "What exactly does building a household from nothing involve?" Xyrith smiled. It was a real smile, perhaps the first genuine one she had ever allowed herself in public. "I have absolutely no idea," she admitted. "I suppose we will figure it out together," Marcus laughed. It was a warm sound, full of relief and hope, and something else that Xyrith was only beginning to understand. "That," he said, "is the most human thing you have ever said." Below them, the selection committee was already plotting revenge. Lord Vrethus was swearing eternal hatred. The political establishment was scrambling to respond to this unprecedented defiance. None of it mattered. Xyrith had made her choice. She had chosen freedom. She had chosen the unknown. She had chosen a human who saw her not as a princess to be owned, but as a person to be valued. As the transport broke through the atmosphere and entered the darkness of space, Xyrith looked out at the stars and felt something she had never felt before. Hope the cruel joke had failed. The trap had been escaped, and somewhere out there, among all those distant points of light, a new life was waiting to be built. She reached over and took Marcus's hand again. He squeezed her fingers gently in return. Neither of them knew what the future would hold, but they knew they would face it together, and that was enough. 5 years had passed since that day in the assembly hall. 5 years since Xyrith had turned a cruel joke into the beginning of something new. 5 years since she and Marcus had walked away from everything she had known. They had started with almost nothing. Marcus had some savings from his years as a liaison officer. Xyrith had sold her jewelry, the only thing she had been allowed to keep. Together they had enough to buy a small station in neutral space. It was old and worn, barely functional, forgotten by everyone who mattered. It was perfect. The first refugees arrived within a month. A border conflict had broken out between two minor powers, and thousands of people had nowhere to go. No major government wanted to take them in. They were the wrong species, the wrong religion, the wrong political alignment. They were problems that powerful people preferred to ignore. Marcus and Xyrith did not ignore them. They opened their small station to anyone who needed shelter. Marcus worked around the clock to coordinate food and supplies. Xyrith negotiated with reluctant traders who did not want to deal with refugees. They argued about resource allocation during the day and fell asleep holding each other at night. It was hard. It was exhausting. It was the most meaningful work either of them had ever done. Word began to spread. A Valorian princess and a human had built a sanctuary in neutral space. They turned no one away. They asked nothing in return, except that those they helped would someday help others. More refugees came. Then came people who had simply been forgotten by the galaxy. Orphaned children whose species had been wiped out by war. Elderly beings whose families had abandoned them. Workers who had been injured and discarded by companies that no longer needed them. The small station became too crowded. Marcus found ways to expand. Xyrith found ways to pay for it. Their arguments grew louder, and so did their laughter. Their first child was born in the station's cramped medical bay. The doctor was a former refugee who had stayed to help others. The nurses were volunteers from 6 different species. When the baby took her first breath and cried out, everyone in the room wept with joy. They named her Lyra. She had her mother's silver-violet skin and her father's stubborn, hopeful eyes. Other couples began to seek them out. Mixed-species pairs who had been rejected by their families. Same-gender couples from cultures that did not accept them. Anyone whose love did not fit into the neat categories that Societies demanded. The Cole Kalara Foundation became known as a place where families could be built without anyone's permission. By the 3rd year, they had established 5 stations. By the 5th year, that number had grown to 17. Each one operated under the same simple principles that Marcus and Xyrith had followed from the beginning. Help those who need help. Ask nothing in return. Build something that will last. The galaxy began to notice. The selection committee had been disbanded in disgrace. Their corruption had been exposed when investigators started asking questions about how they had treated the princess. Lord Vrethus's dynasty had collapsed under the weight of its own crimes. The enemies who had tried to trap Xyrith had destroyed themselves, the Valorian. Sovereignty sent a formal delegation to the Foundation's main station. Xyrith's mother came personally. The queen walked through corridors filled with children from a dozen different species, all playing together without any awareness that they were supposed to hate each other. "I was wrong to oppose your choice," the queen said quietly. "I thought you were throwing your life away." "I was throwing away the life others had chosen for me," Xyrith replied. "I kept the life I chose for myself." The sovereignty formally recognized the Foundation as a sovereign entity. Other governments followed. The organization that had started as an act of defiance became a force for change across multiple sectors of space, and everywhere the Foundation grew, people began to see humans differently. They were no longer the cosmic punchline. They were no longer the lowly workers who cleaned floors and hauled cargo. Humans had shown that their emotional nature was not a weakness. Their short lives did not make them less valuable. Their tendency to care about everything was not foolishness. It was their greatest strength. Humans built connections. Humans remembered names and faces and small kindnesses. Humans treated strangers like potential friends instead of potential enemies. And when humans loved, they loved without calculation or agenda. Marcus Cole had never tried to prove anything to the galaxy. He had simply been himself. And being himself had changed everything. On the anniversary of their Foundation bond, Xyrith found Marcus in the garden module they had built together. It was a small green space filled with plants from 100 different worlds. Butterflies that should not have been able to survive in space drifted through the air, kept alive by technology that Xyrith still did not fully understand. Lyra was chasing those butterflies, her laughter echoing off the walls. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked. Xyrith watched their daughter leap and spin, trying to catch the colorful insects that always stayed just out of reach. She thought about the assembly hall all those years ago. She thought about the mockery and the cruelty and the moment she had chosen him. "Only that I did not find you sooner," she said. Marcus took her hand. His skin was warmer than hers, always had been. It was one of the small differences between their species that she had come to love. "We built this," he said quietly, gesturing at the station around them. The ships arriving with more refugees, the families they had helped create, from nothing. Xyrith shook her head. "No, we built this from everything they said did not matter. From kindness, from compassion, from the simple belief that everyone deserves to be seen and valued." She looked at him with all 4 of her eyes. "That is different." Lyra came running toward them, demanding to be lifted up. Marcus scooped her into his arms while Xyrith wrapped herself around them both. Somewhere out in the galaxy, there were still hierarchies and cruelties. There were still people who thought some species were better than others. There were still those who dismissed kindness as weakness and compassion as foolishness. But here, in the Foundation they had built together, none of that mattered here. There was only family. The selection committee had assigned Marcus to Xyrith as a cruel joke. They had wanted to humiliate her. They had wanted to teach her that she was powerless against their schemes. Instead, she had found the person who would help her build something greater than any of them had ever imagined. She had found a partner who asked for nothing and gave everything. She had found love in the most unlikely place in the universe. And together, it proved that the galaxy's punchline has become its salvation. The butterflies danced around them in the artificial sunlight. Lyra giggled and reached for them with tiny hands. Marcus and Xyrith held each other and watched their daughter play. It was not the ending anyone had expected. It was better. It was a beginning.